Have you ever trusted someone only to realize later they weren't who you thought they were? Imagine how powerful it would be if you could see through the masks people wear and instantly recognize their true colors. Today, using timeless Stoic wisdom, I'm going to share 5 clear signs that reveal the genuine character behind the facade. But why should you care? Because misjudging character can cost you deeply in relationships, at work, and in your personal peace. What if the person you confide in is secretly manipulating you? Or that friend who smiles warmly is quietly sabotaging your success? Stoicism offers practical tools to recognize subtle red flags that most people overlook. The way someone treats others who can't help them, how they handle minor setbacks, how they manage their time, act when nobody's watching, and how they behave when given power. Stick with me until the end, because after identifying these 5 critical signs, I'll also show you exactly how to use this insight to strengthen your relationships, sharpen your judgment, and even guide future generations. Ready to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface? Let's dive in. Number 1. Treating those who can't help. Who are you truly when nobody is watching, and when the person standing in front of you can offer no benefit whatsoever? It's in these quiet, uncelebrated moments that our real character comes into sharp focus. Each of us has witnessed, or perhaps even experienced firsthand, being overlooked, ignored, or treated as invisible, simply because we seem to have no immediate value to offer. It's a universally familiar feeling, yet incredibly revealing about human nature. According to Stoicism, these seemingly insignificant interactions are actually profound ethical tests. Marcus Aurelius himself emphasized that virtue isn't demonstrated by grand gestures performed before an audience, but by humble acts done in private. The Stoics believed that how someone treats those who can neither help nor harm them reveals the genuine depth of their moral character, far more than polite behavior displayed strategically in a business meeting or negotiation ever could. Opening doors for strangers, actively listening, or offering a sincere thank you are small but consistent ethical trials encountered every day, silently revealing the truth about who a person really is. Consider everyday interactions you've likely observed. The way someone treats a restaurant server after a long wait, their response to a janitor quietly cleaning the floor, or their patience with an elderly pedestrian crossing the street slowly. When someone dismissively rolls their eyes, speaks rudely, or avoids eye contact entirely, they unknowingly expose a deeper truth about themselves, a truth that remains hidden when they're on their best behavior. It's in these tiny acts of impatience or disdain that authentic character either thrives or collapses. This distinction draws a clear line between 2 types of people: those whose kindness emerges naturally and effortlessly, and those who wear kindness merely as a costume, slipping it off the moment the spotlight fades. There's an uncomfortable yet undeniable truth here. The same person who enthusiastically flatters their boss may show contempt or irritation toward the building's security guard. These revealing contradictions are precisely where someone's true colors shine through. Ask yourself honestly, how do you behave when no one recognizes your name, or when your reputation isn't at stake? At its heart, genuine compassion never selectively chooses its recipients. A truly compassionate person does not treat people kindly based solely on mood, convenience, or status. Their kindness flows consistently from stable inner principles rather than fleeting feelings or external validation. A person authentically living their values doesn't need to announce it, because every small action naturally expresses it. From a Stoic perspective, ethics and morality are not single moments of heroism, but repeated, habitual actions performed quietly every day. True kindness doesn't require performance or applause. It requires steady, silent commitment. Someone who treats others respectfully when unseen is genuinely embodying Stoicism's most profound teachings: integrity through consistent practice. But perhaps the most powerful step isn't in judging others' behavior, it's turning the spotlight inward, asking yourself, how do I treat those who can't offer me any advantage? Observing your own daily interactions, no matter how trivial they seem, can become a profound Stoic exercise in self-awareness. It reminds you that your ethical worth isn't reflected in what you say publicly, but in the quiet choices you make privately, day after day. Ultimately, small acts of kindness leave behind powerful legacies, even if nobody notices or applauds. True virtue doesn't seek recognition or reward. It simply seeks to align your actions with what you deeply know is right. Remember this. Real character is measured not by how you act toward those in positions of power, but precisely how you treat those who hold no power at all. Number 2. Handling minor inconveniences. Picture this familiar scenario. You're stuck in slow-moving traffic, someone messes up your coffee order, or your internet connection suddenly slows down right in the middle of important work. How do you typically react? Is your immediate response irritation, anger, or even frustration? Or do you find yourself calmly accepting these minor inconveniences? Have you ever considered that these seemingly trivial moments actually reveal far more about your true nature than you might realize? According to Stoic philosophy, these small, everyday annoyances are far from insignificant. They serve as quiet, ongoing tests of our moral and emotional character. Stoics believe that our instinctive, unguarded reactions to life's minor setbacks reveal our true selves far more clearly than the carefully rehearsed behaviors we exhibit in public or when trying to impress others. It's precisely because these moments catch us unprepared, without time to perform or act, that they become genuine indicators of who we truly are beneath our polished exterior. When irritation bubbles to the surface, or harsh words escape without thought, it's not just our mood that's being tested. It's our character. Take, for example, how people respond when facing small errors at work or in a restaurant. Imagine a waiter accidentally brings the wrong dish to your table. One customer may raise their voice, complain loudly, or demean the server, while another person simply smiles gently, calmly explains the mistake, and kindly requests the correct order. These two opposite responses might seem minor in isolation, yet they illustrate vastly different inner worlds. The first person's behavior causes immediate discomfort, creating tension that spreads beyond the initial encounter. The second individual's calm demeanor instantly diffuses tension, establishing a mood of warmth and cooperation that positively affects everyone involved. These seemingly insignificant reactions have far-reaching effects. Just as a single pebble thrown into water creates ripples that extend outward, our momentary responses shape our immediate environment, influencing coworkers, friends, and family. A brief moment of irritation can ignite stress or anxiety in others, spreading negativity further than we realize. Conversely, every small composed reaction can radiate calmness and comfort, transforming the atmosphere around us into a place of serenity. The Stoics remind us, we may not control when or how these irritations arrive, but we always have complete control over how we respond. Over time, our habitual reactions accumulate and shape not only our character but our very lives. Consider the negative spiral created by continually responding with irritation to minor annoyances. Each outburst amplifies the stress we carry within ourselves, gradually eroding our inner peace. Negative thinking can magnify even minor inconveniences into problems that haunt us throughout the day, distorting reality and reducing our overall quality of life. To break this cycle, Stoics encourage self-awareness. Am I truly upset by this event, or am I troubled by my own reaction to it? We can begin embracing Stoicism in practical ways through life's small irritations. Start by consciously practicing patience. Smile through small inconveniences, pause briefly before responding, and consciously view each inconvenience as an opportunity to build resilience and character. Rather than allowing these everyday moments to become excuses for losing composure, Stoics encourage us to use them as mental training exercises to strengthen our emotional intelligence. Calmness, they remind us, isn't cultivated in solitude or meditation halls alone. It develops in coffee shops, at red traffic lights, and when our inboxes overflow. Ultimately, your true character isn't demonstrated by lofty ideals or powerful statements. It's quietly revealed in how you navigate life's mundane, everyday challenges. So next time you encounter a minor inconvenience, ask yourself, am I in control of my emotions, or are they controlling me? Your ability to maintain composure amid life's smallest disruptions is not trivial. It is the foundational step toward lasting inner strength. Number 3. Time and commitments. What is the most limited asset in your life? If you lose money, you can regain it. If your reputation is damaged, with enough effort, you can rebuild it. But what about time? Time, once gone, is irretrievable. Every second lost is lost forever. We've all experienced the regret of squandering precious hours on meaningless tasks, or felt frustration when someone failed to honor their commitment. The truth is, how someone manages their time and fulfills their promises reveals far more than productivity. It exposes their genuine character. Consider the simple, yet revealing habit of punctuality. Observing whether someone consistently arrives on time, keeps their calendar well organized, and honors their commitments gives you a direct glimpse into their internal priorities. Someone who is habitually punctual demonstrates more than mere politeness. They embody respect. Respect for others, respect for themselves, and respect for life's finite nature. On the other hand, the individual who is routinely late signals something deeper. Perhaps an inflated self-importance, disorganization, or simply a lack of empathy for those around them. From a Stoic perspective, punctuality is not trivial etiquette. It's an essential ethical practice, demonstrating reliability and discipline in even the smallest tasks. Beyond punctuality, another critical marker of someone's true character is how seriously they take their promises. Imagine two distinct types of people. One who consistently follows through on their commitments without needing reminders, and another who makes frequent promises but quickly forgets them once the conversation ends. Over time, this distinction profoundly impacts their credibility. Trust is fragile and can collapse instantly when someone repeatedly fails to deliver what they promise. Stoicism teaches us that keeping commitments isn't about pleasing others or seeking approval. It's about upholding internal integrity, living consistently according to one's principles. Equally revealing is the way someone spends their leisure time, the most honest reflection of their inner values. Observe carefully how individuals use their downtime. Do they actively invest it in personal growth, meaningful hobbies, or quality relationships? Or do they habitually let it slip away, lost in endless scrolling or mindless distractions? Not all leisure activities are inherently negative. However, becoming consumed by trivial, passive entertainment often indicates a lack of self-direction. Ask yourself this powerful Stoic question. Are you simply spending your time, or are you consciously investing it? The impact of thoughtful time management extends far beyond the individual. It affects everyone around them. A person who consistently respects deadlines and commitments creates a positive atmosphere for their entire team or social circle. In contrast, someone who habitually misses deadlines or arrives late unintentionally communicates disrespect and creates unnecessary friction. Effective time management isn't merely a skill. It's an expression of empathy. It conveys that one understands the value of others' time, recognizing its equal preciousness. Another essential quality is flexibility, the ability to remain calm and focused when things don't go according to plan. Picture this scenario: a flight delay, sudden rescheduling, or unexpected disruptions at work. Who panics, creating stress and confusion, and who calmly assesses the situation and adapts quickly? Stoicism emphasizes managing what lies within our control and accepting gracefully that which does not. The ability to remain poised under pressure is perhaps the ultimate test of emotional maturity, showcasing a person's inner stability. Ultimately, the Stoics remind us that time never lies about someone's true values. You don't need to ask someone about their priorities. Simply watch how they spend each hour of their day. Ask yourself this critical question today. Am I actively using my time to live meaningfully, or am I passively allowing it to slip away? Remember this powerful Stoic truth. Living purposefully begins with respecting and honoring the one asset you can never reclaim, your time. Number 4. Acting unseen. If no one were watching, would you still choose to do the right thing? This simple yet profound question strikes at the very heart of human nature. Consider your actions when you find yourself completely alone. How do you treat your surroundings, your responsibilities, or even the smallest objects around you? Stoicism teaches us a powerful truth. Genuine character isn't measured by what you do in front of an audience, but rather by your choices when you stand alone, accountable only to your conscience. Think of everyday actions, such as returning a shopping cart, cleaning up after yourself in shared spaces, or simply disposing of trash properly. These may seem trivial, yet they carry significant ethical weight. Observing these actions can reveal someone's character far better than any carefully crafted public persona. For instance, compare two distinct individuals. One who carefully returns the cart to its designated place, even when it's raining, versus someone who leaves it carelessly in a parking lot simply because no one is there to witness or judge. These quiet, seemingly insignificant acts may remain invisible to the wider world, but they're vividly clear reflections in the mirror of a person's integrity. The workplace provides another revealing environment. Consider a colleague who consistently meets deadlines, delivers high-quality work, and fulfills commitments without needing oversight or reminders. Contrast this with someone who frequently blames others, cuts corners, or subtly claims credit for tasks they did not accomplish. In the workplace, true ethical behavior isn't showcased in presentations or speeches. It's revealed in the quiet diligence of performing responsibilities faithfully, especially when there's no spotlight. These silent moments of accountability are precisely where authentic character shines brightest or fails most noticeably. True kindness and integrity don't require public acknowledgement or applause. They simply need to be carried out. Imagine someone who quietly helps a stranger, returns lost valuables without fanfare, or defends what's right without posting about it on social media. Such silent deeds, though unnoticed by the masses, often have a deeper and more profound impact than loud declarations of virtue. Genuine goodness doesn't seek witnesses. It seeks alignment with inner values. A person who acts kindly even when no one is there to validate or applaud their behavior reveals something profoundly beautiful about their internal moral compass. Consistent, quiet acts of integrity gradually shape an ethical, principled life. Stoicism emphasizes this ongoing discipline. When your actions remain consistent, whether witnessed by many or no one at all, you build authentic self-control and inner resilience. Every small, unseen decision you make is like placing another brick, gradually constructing the moral foundation of the life you inhabit every single day. Now pause for a moment and honestly reflect. Am I truly consistent when no one is watching? Consider noting down small daily behaviors you can consciously improve. Gently closing doors, picking up litter without prompting, or proactively cleaning up shared spaces. Remember, Stoic ethics are not practiced to impress others, but to maintain inner tranquility and alignment. Ultimately, character isn't found in grand declarations or impressive statements about your beliefs. Your character is quietly demonstrated through what you repeatedly choose to do when there's nobody standing behind you. Let your silent, everyday actions become the most compelling evidence of the person you aspire to be. Stoicism reminds us that true kindness needs no spotlight, only a heart steadfast enough to shine quietly on its own. Number 5. Handling power. Here's a question that cuts deep. When you have the power to influence someone's life, do you use it to control or to uplift? Power doesn't corrupt people, it exposes them. When someone believes they're untouchable, when no one can say no to them, that's when their true character is revealed. And from a Stoic lens, power is not a tool for domination. It is the ultimate test of restraint, empathy, and self-governance. Stoicism teaches that real strength is not about overpowering others, but about mastering oneself. Whether you're a team leader, a parent, a friend, or simply someone others look to for guidance, your power shows in how you carry your responsibilities. The true mark of character is found not in how loudly someone commands, but in how quietly they serve. One type of person uses power to lift others up, to help them reach their potential. The other uses it to protect their ego, assert control, or feed insecurity. And this difference? It becomes visible not in grand gestures, but in the small, unnoticed moments. Watch how someone treats those they have authority over when there's no audience around. Do they belittle or ignore? Or do they remain patient, respectful, and supportive? Consider how they handle sensitive information. Do they share it to manipulate and gain advantage, or do they hold it responsibly, understanding its weight? Think about how they influence decisions in personal relationships. Do they push their agenda, guilt trip, or emotionally corner others? Or do they foster trust and collaboration, even when they could easily take control? Some of the most dangerous uses of power aren't loud, they're subtle. In personal relationships, power can manifest through emotional control, financial dependency, or even silence. When a conflict arises, the person with more emotional leverage might not shout or threaten, but they might withdraw, manipulate, or make the other feel small. Stoicism reminds us, power should never be used to win over someone we care about. It should be used to preserve respect, to build trust, and to honor the connection. And here's something most people forget. You don't need a title to hold power. If you're older, smarter, more experienced, or wealthier in any setting, you have influence. A teacher over a student, a sibling over a younger one, a friend who pays the bill. Even the ability to explain something better in a heated debate gives you a position of power. The Stoic approach is to recognize that power, not to exploit it, but to carry it with humility and care. When used wisely, power creates a ripple effect of trust, dignity, and strength. A boss who listens to their team builds morale. A partner who supports without controlling nurtures lasting love. But when power is used selfishly, when someone needs to dominate to feel secure, it erodes relationships, weakens organizations, and damages lives. True impact doesn't come from how much power you hold. It comes from how others feel in your presence when you use it. So ask yourself, or observe others, when I have the power to influence, what do I choose to do with it? And what does that choice reveal about me? Because the final measure of someone's true colors isn't how they act when they're powerless. It's how they act when they could easily get their way and choose not to. Power isn't about control, it's about character. And the strongest people are those who could command, but choose to build instead. The 5 signs we've explored: how someone treats those who can't help, handles minor inconveniences, manages time and commitments, acts when unseen, and uses power, each offer a clear window into their true character. These moments may seem small, but they reveal everything. In a world full of performance and pretense, it's the quiet choices, made without reward or recognition, that tell you exactly who someone really is. So the next time you want to truly understand someone, watch how they behave when they think no one's paying attention. If this video helped you see human nature more clearly, or reflect deeper on your own values, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe to Stoic Spirit for more Stoic wisdom that empowers you to live with strength, clarity, and purpose every single day. And remember, true character is never hidden. You just have to know where to look.